Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to track one, the sponsor track at Swiss Cyberstorm. My name is Catherine Chapman. Very pleased to be with you for the rest of the afternoon. I hope everyone managed to get something to eat, a coffee, and are ready to get stuck in for our next round of talks. Our next talk is on assessing and securing third-party maintenance access, and it is my pleasure to introduce Fabian Gonzalez, who is team leader and senior penetration tester at Oneconsult. Over to you.
Good. Thank you for this introduction. Okay, mic check is working. Perfect. So I also welcome you to this talk about assessing and securing third-party maintenance access. So, as told before, my name is Fabian Gonzalez. I work as penetration tester at Oneconsult with the focus on red teaming assessments as well as Active Directory pen tests. Good. So let's move to the high-level scenario. Let's see. Okay, perfect. It's working. Good. This is a high-level scenario that we will use during this talk to show you some risks and measures about third-party maintenance accesses and also to discuss it. So imagine there is a third-party provider that has access to an application server which is in the internal network and managed by the internal IT department. So the third party has access to this server because it needs to configure, install, update this service running on this application server. For accessing it, he might use Citrix, VPN, or a similar tool to access the server. Let's take a focus on the access. So when accessing the server over VPN or Citrix, for example, we can restrict the access on a time-based. This means, for example, that only during weekdays the server can be accessed. Also, we can restrict the IP range, meaning maybe only the IP range of the provider is able to connect to this device, as well as maybe also even we can just assure that only selected employees of the third party have access to this application server. We can also restrict the privileges, so we should use the least privileges as possible. This means if the third party only needs access to this application server, they should also only be able to log in to this server and not to any other server. There are also further access restrictions, for example using multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication for example, and there are also possibilities for proctored access when an internal employee just watches while this external employee does his configuration or performs his stuff. And we could also use some kind of access that is only initiated by the internal company, for example using screen sharing or other tools that in this case the third party company has no direct access to this server. Next we'll focus on the server side. So here we can do some general hardening. For example, we could do some Windows hardening using the CIS benchmark. We could also harden the application running on this server. And then there is a big question if the third party needs local admin rights on the server or not. Often there's the case that local administrative permissions are needed on this server to, for example, change the configuration or update the software and perform additional administrative tasks. So let's see what is the impact when this third party company has local administrative rights on this server and what could happen if, for example, a malicious employee which has this access tries to attack the company. First, we have the local users. We still often find in companies that the passwords of the local users, especially on servers, the local administrator users, are reusing password, for example, in similar network zones or on similar application servers. We still often find them. So when an attacker has local administrative rights, he can get a hash value called Untitled hash, which can be used to access this server as this user, for example over the network or also on the machine. To perform such attack, it is required to create a copy, for example, of the registry, which can be done by the built-in Windows reg tool. And as it can be seen in the screenshot below, there are several tools which allow to get this hash value out of the registry, and then it can be misused to access this server or additional servers which use the same local administrative password. How can we secure this? Obvious, we should use unique passwords on all servers, also for the local users. Further, there are group policy settings. The one that you can see on the right side are for the user account control. You can enable them for all local administrative users as well as also for the built-in administrative user. This ensures that an administrative user, a local user with administrative permissions, is not able to run any administrative command over the network on the server. Further, you could also deny access over the network for local users, and even it's possible to deny remote desktop access for local users. Here you need to be sure, if you deny remote desktop for the local user, that you have another way to access, for example, the management console of this server in case that the server does not connect anymore to the internal domain. Then we have service accounts. So any service account configured in the Windows service settings stores its clear text password inside the registry. Here it's also possible with local administrative rights to dump this password and get out the clear text password. As well, we also have configuration files. Maybe we have some configuration files declaring the username and password of a database. These config files could also be misused by an attacker. Therefore, it's very important that the least privilege model is used for service users. Next, we will take a look at Windows in-memory credentials. So in Windows, there is a process called Accessi. This process holds all credential information in the memory. This is needed because, for example, if you connect to a Windows server, you maybe want to access from there group share or access other services that are located on other servers, and often users don't want to log in again and enter again their credentials. So what happens is that this process holds the credential in memory, and there are tools such as shown in the screenshot below, Mimikatz, that allow to dump some credential information. In this case here, in the default setup, it is possible to dump the Untitled hashes, which are equivalent to a password and can be used to remotely access this device from another machine. And as long as we have users connected over RDP or running a process on this device, it's possible to get access to such credentials. Further, we have remote desktop processes that also holds passwords in memory. This is only the case when the current remote desktop session is active, meaning in the screenshot we can see session 2 and 5 are currently active. From these sessions we can dump also the clear text password with a tool called Mimikatz. So how can we prevent or at least make it harder to perform such attacks? First, we can start with forced logoff of the users. This means we can set group policy that idle users which are idle for 2 hours or for 1 day or for even more time, as well as inactive users, are disconnected on the server side. When they are disconnected completely, they have no processes running anymore. Therefore, it's not possible to attack them anymore. Further, we have several Windows functionalities that allows us to harden these devices further. One tool is Credential Guard or functionality. With Credential Guard, we can virtualize this LSAS-ICSI process and prevent that it's possible to directly read out credentials out of this process. We also have the possibility to harden remote desktop connections using restricted admin. In this case, every command runs as local system account on this machine. This means that no credentials are stored on the target machine when connecting to the server, but there is a case you cannot access any additional network devices using your account. If you want to access, in this case, a network share, you need to again enter your credentials, and in this case the credentials are again stored on this server. There is also a feature called Remote Credential Guard. This needs at least Windows 10 or Windows Server 2016. And in this case, remote desktop is only possible with Kerberos authentication. This means that no Antilium hashes are on the target system. There is only Kerberos be used. So what could attacker further do when they just want to misuse the user permissions and not get access to the credentials of another user? Firstly, we have process injection. So an attacker could inject any code in another process when he has local administrative permissions on the server. In this case, there are custom tools needed, and there is additional workload needed to perform such an attack, but it's still possible, and sometimes in malware attacks this is the case, that the attacker injects code in another process to just misuse these user permissions. Further, we could create a backdoor on the system. For example, we could replace a binary, for example Explorer exe, and add malware to this binary. So as soon as someone else runs this program, the code is then executed in his session. But we could also change, for example, autorun entries to, as seen in the screenshot, add a new domain admin as soon as the domain admin connects to this server. So for these attacks there is no full prevention, but we can still lower the risk. So we can ensure that RDP sessions are forcefully locked off after some time, that there are no processes left on the server for a long time. Often in audits we see that there are people that logged on a server and kept the session disconnected for more than 2 to 7 days. Maybe even we see sessions that are a month old. So all these sessions would have been there if they were disconnected after 1 hour or after half a day. And then the attack surface is a lot smaller, as we cannot attack directly these users which have an inactive session. Further, we can deny that domain admin users can access the servers. So when we have a domain admin, we should give him an additional user that only has server admin rights and not directly domain admin rights to access the servers that he needs to access. He just should use his domain admin account to manage the Active Directory. Also, we can use restricted RDP so that everything is run as system, with the drawbacks that we cannot connect to further machines from there. And there are also privileged access management solutions called PAM solutions, which allow to change the passwords frequently of high privileged users. There are cases where the password is changed directly after 1 hour, or even some configuration allow to set an individual password for each session, meaning each time when you connect to a new server, the user password will be changed, so that an attacker that got access to one password, in the best case, he only has a limited time to use this password, or even this password is already invalid. So let's take a look at further measures that can be performed. We maybe can use a separate Active Directory or a separate forest for such application servers which are managed by a third-party provider. Maybe it's also possible to use a non-domain joint server. This is maybe also harder to administer, but in this case we don't have domain users on this server which could be misused to attack other servers in the domain. Further, we can do some network-based isolation to prevent access from these servers to additional servers, so that even if we got access to additional credentials, we cannot use them, as the third-party provider has no access to other servers. Also, we could use jump hosts to increase the security level, that only this host can be used for administration, and when we are on this application server, we cannot access administrative ports. So let's assume we have such a case in our network. This is a screenshot of users that are logged on. Good. So what could go wrong when the external provider has a malicious intent with local administrative permissions on this server? So we have a local administrator. This administrator has been used to connect our remote desktop to the server. So if we deny network login and use different passwords for this administrator, the local user cannot be used anymore to access the server. Even if we only use different passwords on all servers for the local users, in such a case, when the third-party provider gets access to the credentials of the local administrator, he can just misuse them on the current server on which he already has local administrative rights. Next, we have an admin user which has a session that's idle for 1 day and a bit more. So when we force log off all users after 2 hours, this user is not anymore logged in and he has no process running anymore, so it's not possible to attack him anymore. Further, as we can see in the naming convention, maybe there is a domain admin user logged in on this server. For this user, we provide him an additional server administrative user as the other admin users, just to assure that when his account got compromised, it's just a server administrative user that does not have access to manage the domain. Then we have another administrative user. This user has currently an active session and is maybe performing some tasks on this server. So here we could use Credential Guard or Restricted Admin to at least harden his session and to make it harder to gain access to the user's credential. Further, we could use a privileged access management solution to ensure that if someone got this user's credential, at least they are invalid after the next hour, for example. So, next I would switch to the question slides. So, do you have any questions?
Brilliant. First, let's give a round of applause for Fabian. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Any questions? We still have lots of time, so anyone have anything, burning desire, get it out now. I guess, does this mitigation that you've shown, does that apply to internal employees as well who can access the server, or who have local access rights?
Yes. So these mitigations can be performed for any internal users as well. So this means if even there is a malware case or a user, a server administrator, which got compromised, or an internal employee with malicious intent, it's possible to further harden the servers and prevent some part of these attacks.
Brilliant. Did that inspire anyone to ask anything else? No, not yet. And how long have you been a penetration tester for, Fabian?
Well, in January for 6 years.
For 6 years. Are there any other penetration testers in the room today? None. Oh, there's one right there. Not a question, just another penetration tester. Very cool. I guess I wonder what, after speaking to many penetration testers myself, what got you into looking at third-party access and how to mitigate it? Was there a certain, I mean, part of this was to be able to raise awareness about this, right? About these issues. So I wonder what got you into it as a research area.
So the case is that often we have companies that want to have kind of a red teaming or attack simulation, and sometimes the question is, what could this external company perform if they have an employee with a malicious intent? And then we evaluate such scenarios and perform such attacks to point out and show awareness and give them further details how they can harden against such attacks.
Thank you very much. Last chance. Okay, well, then let's give another round of applause for Fabian and his wonderful presentation. Thank you.